If you imagine living and working in a living museum, that's what Assiniboine Lodge is all about.
Plain of the Six Glaciers Tea House is really a place of peace. You can hear the stream, you can hear the wind in the trees, and at night you can hear your own heartbeat. It's so quiet.
People enjoy coming up to Abbott Hut because it's such a spectacular location. To have a very comfortable hut, it really allows people to enjoy their time here and savor the climbing experience.
If you're talking about the great lodges of the Canadian Rockies, the Banff Springs is the original Rocky Mountain resort. It's the Grand Old Lady.
National funding for Great Lodges of the Canadian Rockies was made possible by Alberta Travel. Call us at 1-800-ALBERTA. And contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. The Rocky Mountains. For centuries, a barrier to the unification of Canada. Until the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1885, the slender ribbon of steel which created a country where once there had been a wilderness. To build the railway, the Canadian government wooed a swaggering American engineer-entrepreneur named Cornelius Van Horn. He would thrive on the challenge that lay ahead.
That was the beginning. They brought Van Horn up from the States to make sure the railway was put in place quickly. He was evidently a huge man, big belly, big bones, big voice, and big appetites. He said, I eat all I can, I drink all I can, I don't give a damn for anyone.
The problem was, who would now ride the railway? Never to be outdone, Van Horn announced he had invented the tourist.
When the railway was completed, the first brochure that was published by the Canadian Pacific Railway announced the line as the new highway to the east. And everyone thought, of course, that they were completely misguided. Did they not know that Montreal to Vancouver meant traveling west? But what they did realize is that that was the Northwest Passage by land. And wealthy, elegantly dressed passengers would take first-class trains across the country. Once they reached Vancouver, board Empress liners bound for a dozen exotic ports in the Far East. And the thing that was absolutely amazing is that you had first-class train service onto unmapped terrain on a continent. Even 11 years after the completion of the Transcontinental Railway, the West had only been surveyed 5 miles on either side of the tracks. So you could get on a train, travel in absolute elegance to unknown, unmapped, completely magical places.
With the wealthiest people in the world now traveling across Canada on its rail line, Canadian Pacific set about providing suitable accommodations for this elite clientele. Beside the railway line, near a mineral springs where hot water bubbled from the ground, Van Horn built a luxury hotel and spa. He would call it the Banff Springs. In 1888, just 3 years after the railway was completed, the hotel opened. Here, on the edge of a wilderness, was elegance and luxury to match the courts of Europe.
If you're talking about the great lodges of the Canadian Rockies, the Banff Springs Hotel is a spectacular building. It's the first big mountain resort in Canada. Banff Springs, probably the best example of the chateau style in the Rockies, with those soaring spires perfectly suited in some ways to the craggy Mount Rundle and that kind of gray stone.
When Canadian Pacific decided to expand the Banff Springs in 1927, the resulting steel and concrete building would be one of the tallest in Western Canada. Rough-hewn stone for the outer walls was quarried from nearby Mount Rundle, maintaining the illusion of a castle. In the 1990s, when the hotel decided to expand once again, Robert LeBlond, a Calgary architect, was hired to integrate the old with the new.
The Banff Springs Hotel is a Scottish baronial kind of you can see all around. It's a very masculine building. You got the strong arches and you got the strong pillars. The way we saw it architecturally is like a rock that fell off the mountain and plunked in there amongst the trees. That's why we did the rock lobby here, the stone lobby.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Banff Springs.
I want to have a wow in there, so it's when people come in there. This is my castle. This is a castle. It's a castle on the mountains.
Have a great day.
People come to Banff and they say, take me to the castle. They don't have to even say, take me to the Banff Springs. They say, just take me to the castle. And everybody knows what that means. Banff Springs is an icon of Canada. It relates to how the West was open. Tourism started in the West. The image of the hotel is known all over the world. It's an international symbol of Canada. People feel they're part of something much bigger. You're part of Canadian history. You walk through the halls, it's documented as you go along. It's a National Historic Site.
Canadian Pacific Railway, built in the middle of the Canadian wilderness, the largest and most spectacular hotel west of Toronto. And it was so completely out of place that packers, guides, and surveyors would stumble out of the forest and think they were hallucinating. It was like running into the Taj Mahal in the middle of the Rockies. And the astounding thing is that it worked. People traveled from Europe, from the eastern United States and Canada, and they all desired to stay in this spectacular luxury within an amazing wilderness.
By the turn of the century, the number of people traveling west grew tenfold. The hotel had become the magnet Van Horn dreamed it would be. Canadian Pacific hired 6 full-time staff just to transfer the steamer trunks full of evening clothes from the station to the hotel.
The wealthy, of course, coming by train could bring an entire wardrobe for special events. Everyone dressed formally for dinner. Orchestras performed nightly. And it was a place to be seen, and it was a place where you could enjoy your wealth and enjoy the company of others who had similar tastes and ambitions.
The hotel was considered to be one of the most cosmopolitan spots in the entire world. This was the place to be, and sooner or later, everyone came through the hotel. It was said at the time that the men would fish and play golf, and the women would change their clothes. Well, one of the great attractions of the hotel has been this notion of luxury in the wilderness. You know, instead of roughing it, you're out here smoothing it, and you're able to go out by day and do these heroic activities, and then come back and have fine meals, listen to fine music, and be really very, very comfortable with the people that are appropriate to your social class.
By the 1920s, the hotel could claim to provide every amenity, from Dixieland jazz to goat's milk and goose pâté. Like the Champs-Élysées or Trafalgar Square, the swimming pool at the Banff Springs became a place to be seen among the international elite.
They actually had a society press agent at the hotel that would chronicle the comings and goings of the various personalities at the hotel and get the word out to the rest of North America as to what these people were doing and how they were spending their summer. The 30s was sort of the heyday of the great old press publicity where you'd put somebody in a suit of armor and, of course, the obligatory 2 women in bathing suits who were working as caddies. They would have live chamber music in the evening, and then they'd have a big annual ball in which the citizens from the street below would get to come up and marvel at the hotel.
These images from the Canadian Pacific Archives proved a treasure trove for interior decorator Carrie Busby, hired to return the hotel to its original splendor.
I collect, documents I can find, including old postcards and letters that people have written that have stayed at the hotel. And on some of them, they talk about the color the dining room was or their guest room. And I do keep that in mind when we're restoring. I did in the public areas. The ballroom was pretty much restored to the way architecturally it was designed originally in the 20s. It's very much an evening room. The ceilings really might be a bit garish during the day, but it's designed for how it looks in the evening with the chandeliers on.
The hotel transformed life in Banff. Local guide Jim Brewster surprised his wife by bringing the King and Queen of England home to see the big game trophies on his wall.
Royalty has been an integral part of the Banff Springs history right from the very beginning.
For royalty, they would come and stay for some time, which was with their entourage, and so a whole wing was needed to accommodate them. The vice-regal wing of the hotel was developed specifically for a visit by Edward VIII, the Prince of Wales, in the 20s. It has its own reception hall at one end, which has very low coffered ceilings, which when you walk through it, the lighting's so dim in the coffered ceilings, you lower your voice in sort of hushed tones because it has that kind of castle essence. The rooms have been restored to the original design as much as possible, and a lot of the antiques that were designed specifically for those, they're different than any other part of the hotel, have been put back in the rooms. There's draped beds with crown turrets, beautiful hand-carved headboards. The duvets and bed linens are all imported from Italy and off-whites. The carpets are all Axminsters in a regal design custom-made for that wing of the hotel. To be staying in a wing of a hotel that is restored in a similar manner to how it would have been when there was a royal visit is quite a special event.
Laszlo Funtek, Carrie Busby's predecessor, as much a dramatist as a designer, was hired to give the hotel a European feel.
You really feel like you're going in those old castles and you're walking in the old history times and like in the fairy tales or something.
His masterpiece was the Alhambra dining room, reminiscent of Moorish Spain.
It reminds you of children's tales or something, imagining those old castles. Sort of mystic and a little spooky, Maybe that's why the people like to come here.
My favorite spot in the hotel is actually, there's a little spiral staircase just outside the Alhambra dining room. And it has an elegance that seems to bring together a lot of the best of the hotel. It has beautiful plasterwork on the ceiling, which they used to call mushroom style. It's got irreplaceable Tiffany lamps.
There's just a wealth of antiques in this building. It's It's almost like a museum. There's so many pieces. It's incredible how many beautiful pieces were made originally.
What remains of a century of elegance can still be found in the attic storerooms of the Banff Springs.
It's quite something that these buildings have survived all the changes in the economic times and upheaval that we've gone through.
While the Banff Springs embraced every fashion the century brought to its door, outside, a majestic wilderness provided the perfect frame for a guest's experience.
5 minutes in any direction is the back country. That's what people came looking for in 1888 when they first came to the Banff Springs. The wilderness is just outside of our door, and all you have to do is go explore it.
The Rocky Mountains had captured the world's imagination. Now Canadian Pacific set about building a series of outlier lodges, radiating from the Banff Springs like the spokes of a wheel.
The backcountry lodges were set up high, so they were kind of, think of them as base camps, as if you were in the Himalayas or something. And from there, you could either hike or take horse trips out and be looked after, and then come back into your original destination spot, which would be your Banff Springs Hotel.
If you imagine being one of those tourists, you would end up at the Banff Springs Hotel, dance all night in the ballroom, and then the next morning, a wild-looking wrangler would pick you up and you ride off into the wilderness.
Not everybody's way of traveling now, but back then, that was the only way to go. The horse created most of the trails in the area. The trails were pretty rugged and weren't cleared, and the outfitters had to clear the trails and pack all the stuff and cook for them, and it was virtually a whole new way of seeing the backcountry.
At the point the horses could go no further, the serious climbing began. Yet even in this lonely, dangerous country, for Canadian Pacific, the comfort of the guest was paramount. For many years, the highest lodge in Canada was Abbott Pass Hut. Perched precariously on the continental divide between Mount Victoria and Mount Lefroy. Of the early climbing parties to visit the high country, one of the most famous was the Appalachian Club and a young Boston climber, Philip Abbott. They came to make the first ascent on Mount Lefroy, then considered one of the most treacherous peaks in the Rockies.
Late in the afternoon, they were only 300 feet from the summit, but they were in trouble. The day's heat had softened the snow. Rocks were falling like missiles from the summit, and they were exhausted. And then for some unknown and inexplicable reason, one of the climbers unroped, announced that he would lead the pitch, and disappeared ahead. And moments later, his body hurtled past his astonished friends, bound for the saddle 1,000 feet below. Philip Stanley Abbott was the first mountaineering fatality in Canada, and what a stir it caused. There was calls for the banning of mountaineering. And the Canadian Pacific Railway was in a particularly dangerous and difficult spot because they didn't want their hotel guests dying and not paying their bills. So the Canadian Pacific Railway hired Swiss guides for its resort properties at Rogers Pass, Lake Louise, and Banff.
A number of people from the Appalachian Club who'd climbed with Abbott had also climbed in the Alps and used professional mountain guides, and realized that that was, what they needed to do to make it safer. So they brought the first mountain guide over from Switzerland to climb with them and successfully climb Mount Lefroy. That was what prompted the CPR to bring over professional mountain guides from Europe to climb with their guests.
In 1922, those same Swiss guides were hired to build Abbot Hut at 9,598 feet above sea level, named to honor the dead climber.
Abbot Pass, I mean, today remains a really remote place and a very hard place to get into. Why they wanted a shelter up there was because of the danger of camping, because of the danger of the slides. So they wanted something very robust, in this case a stone building, that would protect the people that were sleeping up there.
They quarried the limestone right on the spot here. It's all this beautiful yellow and pink and blonde limestone. The foundation and all the walls are built in the limestone. And then the rest of the building was built out of wood that they carried up physically.
To reach the ridge the hut was to straddle, they would have to traverse crevices on the treacherous ice field known as the Death Trap.
The Death Trap is really a canyon. It's a glaciated canyon. There's between Mount Lefroy and Mount Victoria, probably 500 feet of ice underneath your feet. And one side of the canyon has glacial ice hanging above it.
Well, they used horses right up on the glacier as far as they could get. And then they had a tramway type thing set up, pulled all the really heavy stuff up, and the rest of them, the guides packed most of the stuff up there on their backs.
There's crevasses below that you need to negotiate and find ways around, and they can be pretty big sometimes in the summer. And also there's seracs above on Mount Victoria that can fall off at unpredictable times.
The only time I've ever been to Abbott's Pass was in the early 90s. The guides were watching these 3 climbers come up, 2 climbers that were experienced with one of their new girlfriend or newly married wife who had never been on a mountain in her life. The guides knew how dangerous it was. They finally pulled in about 9 o'clock in the evening and they made it. They had hit that crevasse and they had to go down into the crevasse right down to the bottom and up the other side because you couldn't go around it. She said she didn't think she would live past the day. She was just waiting to die.
Abbot Hut wasn't for everybody, and if you did make it, a Swiss guide would be your constant companion.
I have a lot of appreciation for the Swiss guides who brought all the heavy timbers and building materials, because I know those are heavy items to be bringing up here to build this structure that we're in. Probably shouldn't admit this, but the heaviest load I've carried up here is 90 pounds. It was a big load, but I imagine the old-timers were carrying probably significantly more, as evident that there's a stove in here. The stoves are a lot heavier than typically the food and ropes and climbing equipment that I'm carrying.
Oh, it's nice to get out of the wind.
It's such a comfortable location and a spectacular location. And the climbing is excellent. It's some of the best in North America. And to have a very comfortable hut at the pass here, it really allows people to enjoy their time here and savor the climbing experience.
It means we don't have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and leave the lodge and walk through the dark. We can come up here the night before and enjoy this place. It's not just shelter, it's a wonderful place to spend the night with all its history and the views, and can have a nice dinner up here and meet with other people, and it really adds to the experience. It becomes much more than just climbing a mountain. And it sleeps 24 people, which is pretty tight when there's 24 people there, but if they're not all snoring, they can all sleep up there.
You don't have to bring your pots and your stove and dishes and all that, so instead you get to bring really good food. People bring wine and fondues and real dinners like you'd cook at home.
Sometimes you're carrying up heavy items such as frozen hams and such, and pies that you don't want to get smashed, and eggs that you don't want to break. And so the challenge is not just getting it up here, it's getting it up here in shape.
I think most of the people that come to the hut hike up here as a destination. I've met lots of people up here who are just hiking, and this is where they wanted to come and spend a night or two. I think the youngest person to come up to this hut might be my son Jasper. I brought him up here in July. He's 9 years old. And it took some encouragement to get him up here, but once he was here, he just thought it was so cool. We went outside and we were bum sliding, big, long bum slides down the lower slopes of Mount Lefroy. I just found I came alive in the mountains, and I loved it here. And I still find I need to get outside in nature every day. But when I get to come up to a hut like this, I get to spend 2 days or more in the mountains and feel the wind outside even when I'm in here. And I really feel connected, and I feel like I can luxuriate in the length of time I get to spend up here in nature.
Oh, it's a beautiful place. A beautiful place. Sitting right out on the edge of nothing. One side you could jump off and disappear.
Between Abbott Pass and Lake Louise is Plain of Six Glaciers Tea House. Built in the Swiss tradition of a halfway house for weary travelers. A stopping place in the last green valley before the Continental Divide.
I've been here my entire life. My first summer I was 7 months old, and I'm 39, so 39 long years.
Suzanne Gillies-Smith runs the lodge with her mother, Joy Kimball.
Meredith, would you peek in that other oven and see how it's doing? Sure.
It was awesome. It was just incredible. There was my sister and myself, no other kids because there wasn't any other kids in the area. I had a pet marmot for the first 10 years of my life. Her name was Charlotte.
And that was their dog. They'd chase her and she'd wait and chase her again.
She's pretty amazing. She had us up here with no phone. Cell phones didn't work back then. We have no electricity. We have no hot water. There's nothing to distribute. There's no outside influences. So everything that you do, you've created.
So that was a bit of a challenge because you had to look after babies, and we had a lot of bears around then too.
She probably won't like me telling you this, but she's 74, or she turned 74 this year, and she has more energy than I do. I mean, she got up this morning to do the baking. I didn't. I slept in.
You get out of your sleeping bag, get cleaned up, go in, make a pot of coffee for me, and then start baking bread, scones, pies, and then the tourists start coming. We like it fresh every day, so it'll all be gone. They're hungry when they get here, and our busy time is between 12 and 5. That's when the bulk of the people get here.
Only 11 miles from the traffic of the Trans-Canada Highway, the tea house is a favorite destination for day hikers from Banff and Calgary.
People come up and they walk past the kitchen, which is on the main floor. They then go up the stairs, go up and sit on the little original 1920s tables. The waitress goes inside, puts the order on the dumbwaiter, which is original, sends that down to the people in the kitchen.
Sending an order, Suzanne.
We make the food and we send it back up. During the day, it's incredibly busy, so you just think about what you have to do and the customers and wanting to please and have everybody have a good experience. They call it the Plain of the Six Glaciers because it's surrounded by 6 glaciers.
The first one is over here on Aberdeen. The second one is Lower Lefroy in the valley. Upper Lefroy up top. Lower Victoria, Upper Victoria, and Popes. So those are the 6.
Snow is not uncommon in any month of the year at this altitude. And over the millennia, the snow cover has accumulated to form glaciers, which move under their own weight down the rock canyons and valleys. Bruce Bembridge takes groups on tours of the high alpine zone.
Rough terrain. As you go higher, you literally get a wider view of things. And you begin to leave the thick trees behind and come to a vista that takes your breath away. We're in a region that literally takes us back 10,000 years, when literally all of Canada was covered with a glacier. And you can see that jagged cliff line of the very leading edge of the hanging glacier on Lefroy. That thickness of ice averages between 300 and 500 feet thick. You'd lose a house in that size of a crevasse down there.
The dangers of the area were many. Extreme and unpredictable weather, rock and ice falling from the cliffs above, and avalanches that could sweep away a mountain lodge.
During the day, you can hear them breaking off, and most of the time you can see them cascading down. At night, when there's no one else here, you can hear the avalanches. Sometimes you hear a huge avalanche at night, and you think, it's the big one.
When the lodge was completed, the first customers were well-heeled hikers, brought to explore the high country by Swiss guides dressed in the latest style of tweed suit.
It was originally built by two Swiss guides, the Foyts brothers, and they were commissioned through CP Rail.
I think the two Swiss men that chose this spot chose it very carefully. We're about 1.5 miles from Victoria. So even though we look close, we're still 1.5 miles from where the avalanches are. When I came in '60, they were still guiding, and one of them, I believe, was 79.
They found an incredible location. It's my home. I can't think of anywhere else in the world that I would rather live. This is really a place of peace. You can hear the stream. You can hear the wind in the trees. And at night, you can hear your own heartbeat. It's so quiet.
If Plain of Six Glaciers Tea House was built to be within reach of civilization, Mount Assiniboine Lodge was built to get away from it. Located in the shadow of one of the highest peaks in the Rockies, today, most guests arrive by helicopter.
This is a spirit place. There is nothing which rivals the landscape of these mountains here. Everybody is available at all the time. And here they are not available. They finally found a place where they get away. No email, no cell phone. In the mountains of the world, you will never see something quite like it.
They seem to realize once they're out of the helicopter or once they're in here that they have to go out of their habits, you know, like you don't have to wake up that early, or there's to just enjoy your stay.
Guests at Mount Assiniboine are greeted by owner Sepp Renner, who doubles as a Swiss guide and Canada's highest altitude bellman.
I just love it. It's breathtaking. Good for the heart and good for the soul.
Look at all these gophers here making this little escape hole.
Something about the air and the freshness and the clarity and the smells and grizzly bears and like that, you know, it's really cool.
Here we are in the tower cabin. Okay. That's your home for the next 5 days.
It helps you kind of get back to what's important in life. You know, it's
slower pace and the simpler things. It's a good break.
It's amazing. Not only the beauty of it, but to think about, what it took to do this, for nature to do this.
Located on the west side of the Continental Divide in British Columbia, Mount Assiniboine is one of the most remote lodges in the Rockies. At 7,000 feet, each morning breaks clear and cold. Sepp calls the guests to the main lodge for an early start on the day's hikes. A tradition of 75 years has the guests make their own lunches from fresh ingredients prepared on the site.
We're trying to have the people adapt to what we have and not always we adapt to the people what they want. Otherwise we would have then hot tubs and we had to expand and have generators here, and sure we still have outhouses, so it's if some people can't stand outhouses, well, they have to go to the Banff Spring.
What a feast.
The lodge is actually a real classic Norwegian style architecture. And of course, Erling's picture is in the corner of the dining room, so he's always supervising.
Erling was Erling Strom, a native of Lake Placid, New York, and Norway, who dreamed of bringing skiing to the Canadian Rockies.
Skiing was a relatively new sport. The people really didn't know how to ski very well.
He was a real adventurer. He came here in 1927 with the Marquis degli Albizzi, this Italian marquis, and they had heard that there was this wonderful place here. The local people felt that they were never going to come back because they felt that the snow would just swallow them up. But Erling was Norwegian, and he knew that, like Norway, the snow opens up the land and makes travel much easier.
Erling and Albizzi brought skiers into here for the next 10 years, and above the door you see that Norwegian dragon, and in there are the people engraved who came those first 10 years.
Oh! I'm the eldest son of one of the founders of Assiniboine Lodge. My father's name is inscribed over the front entrance. There it is, Russell Bennett, 1928.
They built just the first lodge where the kitchen and the dining room is at first. And my grandfather said, you'd have to be put to work either making dinner or cleaning it up. And then as soon as dinner was done, he said, you sort of stack all the benches and tables up against the wall and everybody would roll out their bedroll and sleep on the floor.
So very often they learned how to ski on the way in. And after 3 days, they were pretty well accomplished skiers.
Many years later, my father called Sepp Renner, who's the manager here down to the ranch. He said, Sepp, I have a present for you. And he handed Sepp the skis and poles. And he said, these belong at Assiniboine.
That's how they used to come in here. And those skis were on the very first trip into here.
We feel like in some ways we're carrying on a tradition, but in a different sense. We have many guests who have brought generation after generation here, and we have guests that come now who've been coming for 45 years.
Coming back here is wonderful because the hiking and climbing is spectacular, but the feeling of sort of coming back to a place that had been part of my family for over 80 years is just spectacular.
Their lunch is packed. Guests sign up for the various hikes Sepp and Barb take into the backcountry.
Okay. On the hike.
Groups can be as large as 15 or as small as 1. Young and old, botanists and photographers, alpinists and couch potatoes spend an afternoon on the top of the world.
Mount Assiniboine is, it's a very beautiful mountain. The highest mountain in the southern Canadian Rockies. It's almost 12,000 feet high. And it has that classic Matterhorn shape, which was of interest to early mountaineers because they compared it with the Matterhorn in Switzerland.
It's 1,800 feet above any other peak, so it sticks out. And then it has lakes on all sides. So it's just studded with little jewels.
Our guests are very adventurous. Some of them have never hiked before. Many have hiked a lot. So for some people, it's a whole new experience. And because we have guided trips, one of the most exciting things we do is showing someone new how wonderful it is to be in the mountains.
And down this drainage is the Mitchell drainage. There's no road, nothing. It's all wild, as wild as it can be.
We usually do a big ridge traverse. We go to Wonder Pass. Then we do the whole skyline to Assiniboine Pass. That trip is about 3,000 vertical feet to climb. It's equivalent of 300 stories in a house. So then it's, oh my God.
It's one of the most beautiful hikes I've ever been on. And then on the way back down, take a detour over to Elizabeth Lake and go for a chilly swim, but quite refreshing. And then walk through the woods and wander your way back. It was a wonderful way to spend a day.
The whiskey jacks are an interesting bird because we have a very cold climate here. And the whiskey jacks are one bird that don't migrate. They stay year-round. They're continually looking for food, seeds and little roots and bugs and whatever, and they stick all of that food under the bark of trees, and they have hundreds of little hiding places.
We like them to do a full day, a good exercise. So they feel tired at night and have a good sleep. Very early in the morning, I'll bring some hot water to the cabins, which is a nice little routine to do. Wake people up, knock on the door, good morning, hot water.
Good morning. Hot water.
That's a good start to the day. Then we have a big breakfast. Breakfast is important.
If anybody is allergic to some food, something you cannot eat, you have to talk to them. But if you don't like porridge in the morning, that's just too bad.
At the beginning of every summer at Mount Assiniboine, a helicopter ferries in a very important part of the lodge's history. "94-year-old Ken Jones first walked into this country in the Great Depression.
He was old ever since I've known him, and that's been a little over 30 years.
He was up with crampons and ice axe up in the roof knocking ice off, you know, and this wasn't that long ago. Look at that crazy old bugger. He's up there beating holes in my roof.
Ken was the first ranger here in 1965, and then we asked him to come back in 1984 to work for us, guiding.
He came in and helped building those places. He knew all the people who were very involved or started, pioneers, so he can talk about the old pioneers. He is a walking legend.
All these trees were smaller. These trees are mostly grown up since I first saw that. They're little things. All these logs were fire kills from what were on the Assiniboine Pass. That fire was in about, what the old timers told me was somewhere around the year 19 or 20.
Ken met Erling Strom that first summer. Strom was starting construction on a cabin on the site, illegally. Park officials had turned down his application, giving him only a permit to cut trees for firewood.
The parks director came up here. Says, I thought we gave you a permit for firewood. And Strom said, yes. Well, he said, that's not firewood. Strom says, well, no, not exactly, but does it matter how I stack my firewood?
You go off the trail and you walk knee-deep in flowers. We've got small alpine flowers. They grow very close to the ground, and they're very hardy and tough. They go through endless snows and frosts during the summer. And they're absolutely spectacular.
If you happen to come from Hong Kong, I mean, the Banff Spring is a huge wilderness experience. To us, it isn't. But for them, you know, there's something for everybody. And here we just offer a different experience.
The slant of the floors is almost like a ship, but it has character, and I think that's what we're looking for now.
Like all the backcountry lodges, Assiniboine was crafted by hand, by men like Ken Jones on the axe and saw.
They're not high enough for me. It's not high enough. The first logs have to be 18 inches above the ground before they start laying the logs. This is Norwegian pattern. It hangs over, made bigger room for the bedrooms. But they had to insulate it underneath and put lumber up, stop the cold from going up. The floor would get too cold and the rooms were too cold.
As my grandfather said, you were a guest with a small G, which meant that as soon as you arrived, they either put you to work skinning log poles or setting foundations or cooking up dinner or fishing or hunting for dinner. It's what I call rustic elegance.
Being here for 20 years, we get so intimate with the landscape. I can tell them, look, down there is behind those trees are elk. Oh, there's a grizzly there digging. Of course, our most great animal here is a grizzly bear. And we have quite a few of them here. When they're busy in the fall and a little bit unpredictable, we try to hike in groups. So we let them know that we are approaching.
They don't see very well. And if you have enough distance between the bear and yourself, you can turn back or change directions.
It's all about to let them know where we are. And if we surprise him, well, he gets a little upset. But if he knows we're coming, he walks away. So in 20 years, we have never had an incident.
I actually seen a wolf last year, which was quite rare. I wasn't sure if it was a wolf first, but I've seen wolf before, so it had to be one. It's just a lonely one. And as soon as he spotted me, he took off.
To make up for a guest's hard day of hiking, scrambling, and climbing, Barb prepares a supper fit for kings.
I'm just going to put them right here.
In the same kitchen where Ken Jones once discovered a bear with a syrup tin over its head.
Snowpeas and mushrooms. And the wild rice salad.
And Lindemann Chardonnay for the other white.
Oh, wow.
After supper, when the guests have retired for the night, Ken convenes a meeting of the guides. Of all the traditions at Mount Assiniboine, none is more enduring than the cougar milk he prepares for the occasion.
Can't use too much of this.
A pinch of nutmeg, evaporated milk, cinnamon, a cup of boiling water.
Uh-oh.
We're in trouble now, Captain.
and some of the strongest rum you can find.
This one needs a little bit more. There you go.
Oh, the rest of them seem pretty good.
Ken tells us stories that take us back to the 1920s or the 1930s when he first came here, and many of them are embellished, and it just makes them better and better.
When we got here, we were all so stiff and food from breaking trail coming up here. We were glad to stop for Erling Strum gave me my, what they call cougar milk. Before that, it was known as moose milk. He said, I'll give you an appetizer while the cook is warming the soup up. So he made a good stiff drink for us. We were feeling real fine by the time the soup come. Next morning we got up, none of us fit to go down Bryan Creek. No, asked the people what they felt like. They said, Hank, you better count on us staying here 3 or 4 days, Ken. Can you spare the time? I said, any time I can spare here.
It's not the normal. He belongs to the place. And once he's gone, no, from that generation there is nobody left. So he's pretty much one of the last ones.
Save for the odd hiking trail, the backcountry has changed little since Ken Jones first rode into Assiniboine in the early 30s. The lodges of the Canadian Rockies remain outposts in a vast northern landscape. For Cornelius Van Horn, these mountains once inspired a castle in the wilderness, the Banff Springs. As much a dream as a hotel, to be conjured up by visitors like Bart Robinson.
You walk into the hotel and you're in another place and another time. That era from 28 to about 38 was absolutely magical, and I doubt will ever be repeated. I find myself just desperately wanting to come back and just hang out for a few days.
For Suzanne Gillies Smith, it's returning through the snow to her home on the plain of 6 glaciers to mark the coming of spring.
Last year when I came in, which was June 5th, I was breaking through to my waist. And that stayed for probably a month. So when the staff come in, I tell them to bring some summer wear, but mainly winter wear for the entire summer. But this is really a place of peace. I'm really busy running the tea house, but when I'm up here, it's the easiest. It's like the telephone doesn't ring, we have no electricity, we have no hot water, there's nothing to disturb you, there's no outside influences. So everything that you do, you've created.
Experience over time gives one in this landscape a grace that is highly admirable. The higher you go up, the closer you come to what the original experience of these mountain landscapes was and what made this aesthetic so powerful in bringing people back again and again to experience it.
And for Sid Foyt's, it's a night high on the Continental Divide, safe within the walls of Abbott Hut, built by his ancestors, the Swiss guides.
The hut had got in pretty bad shape, actually, over the years. 3 or 4 years ago, they finished redoing the whole place. It's better than it was when they built it, really. Oh, it's a beautiful place. Beautiful place. It's sitting right out on the edge of nothing. One side you could jump off and disappear.
Lake Louise is probably the best known of the Grand Train hotels that were connected with putting the railway across Canada. This seems to be the one that people know the best.
The Prince of Wales Hotel is odd in the sense that it was built by an American railway, nowhere near an American railway. It was built in a Canadian National Park by Canadians, but commissioned and designed by Americans.
Twin Falls is the smallest of the backcountry chalets. It's still considered to be quite a backcountry place. You can't drive to it, obviously. The hike takes a fair commitment in terms of physical stamina and being able to pack in there.
Jasper Park Lodge, it's different than any other property. You don't step out of your doorway into a hallway. You step out and you have instantly this breathtaking view of a mountain, or an elk is right there. And it's just literally a step and a breath right outside your door.
The journey to the Prince of Wales Hotel is one few guests ever forget. The long and winding road through the country of the Blackfoot Indians that dead ends at the wall of the Rocky Mountains takes them back to another time, when rum running and prohibition made this border country anything but the international peace park it is today.
You always hear that this is where the mountains meet the sky without the interruption of intervening foothills, and that's largely true. You have prairie species and mountain species mixing right on this borderline without too much intervention. And of course, scenically, it's absolutely spectacular. Come down the highway from Pincher Creek or come up from the U.S. to have this amazing array of mountains culminating in this terrific jewel.
Coming back to the Prince of Wales for me is always emotional. I already know that gap in the mountains that I'm looking for. And as I get closer and drive up, the gap gets larger, the mountains become more recognizable. When you drive up in that parking lot, you're looking up at it. It's incredibly dramatic. Then if you've got clouds going by, it just adds an air of drama.
I think it's one of the most beautiful sights of a building probably anywhere on Earth. It's a wood structure. Those things, as you know, have a tendency to burn up. But this one has lasted all of these years. It is a beautiful old building.
This hotel is sited on the hill to take advantage of the view down the lake. The first thing a tourist sees walking in is immediately the bright white light in front of you. You stop and say, wow. They put 3 huge windows at the end of the lobby to take in that view and focus on the lake.
The small community of Waterton seemed like an improbable choice to locate a luxury hotel. Bordering Montana in the extreme southwest corner of the province of Alberta, access to this isolated region was difficult.
It wasn't until the 1950s that there was a paved road to Waterton. It wasn't until the late 40s that there was electricity in Waterton. Prince of Wales Hotel provided summer electricity to the town site for many years. It isn't a Banff. It's a very small, seasonal town that people enjoy coming to.
In 1913, Waterton was nothing more than a small fishing and hiking camp. when an extraordinary American, Lewis Hill, arrived. The president of the Great Northern Railway, Hill was building a series of lodges just over the border in Glacier Park. He first saw Waterton the day after celebrating his 75th birthday.
Circumstances worked against opening the hotel immediately, or even building a hotel immediately. Within a year of 1913, of course, we had the First World War that shut things down. So, while the Americans weren't involved until 1917, Canada, of course, was locked up in the war effort right from the beginning. The idea of having manpower deployed to build a tourist hotel was unthinkable and didn't happen.
It wasn't until 1923, when Alberta voted to end prohibition, that interest was rekindled.
The U.S. looked like it was in for prohibition for a while. You had rum runners going across the border from Canada into the U.S. It was big business. And Louis Hill figured, hey, if you can't get the booze to Americans, bring the Americans to the booze. The railway never, ever talked about prohibition openly, never advertised prohibition, but knew very well that people would know immediately that, geez, this hotel's in Canada. Ding, ding. Lights go off. We can get beer.
The present-day site overlooking the lake was chosen, and construction began in 1926. In the rush to get the hotel completed, one important detail was overlooked, with nearly disastrous consequences.
The wind is terrible.
We have a little Montana zephyr blowing right now. Here it comes, it's gonna blow my hat off. We get more Chinook winds in this part of Alberta, of course, than they do anywhere else in the province. It's like a gigantic waterfall above the Rocky Mountains, if you can picture that, descending in this immense wave. I have measured winds at my home, which is due north of here, at 147 kilometers per hour.
This is a very exposed site. It's 150 feet above the lake. It's a 7-mile-long lake, and the wind gets funneled down the lake straight at the hotel. The wind the night of December 10th, 11th, 1926 was incredibly strong. We know it was above 90 miles an hour. How much above, we don't know, because when they came out the next morning and checked the anemometer, the thing was twisted and stuck in its maximum position, which was over 90. The wind was so strong it blew the upper portions of the hotel about 5 inches out of plumb. And they actually had to use winches that they set in the ground in front of the hotel, tied a bunch of cables to it, and winched the hotel back into some sort of reckoning.
With all the horse-drawn winches and equipment they had, they never really got it back into plumb, so the whole building is a little bit off.
Despite all the setbacks, the Prince of Wales Hotel opened in 1927.
The hotel is named after the Prince of Wales, who at that time was Edward, later became Edward VIII, and then the Duke of Windsor.
The irony is that there has never been a Prince of Wales who has visited this hotel. The name the Prince of Wales gave it a bit of dignity. When the hotel was built, it was a first-class hotel. It made this town. You did not come in here with old farm clothes on. You were dressed.
Hello, how are you doing today? Good, thank you. I just love
The
this.
hotel opened with a nurse, a doctor on call, a barber shop, a shoe shine boy. Everything that you wanted was at hand.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
When they built these old hotels, they kind of put the rooms wherever they would fit. So most of the rooms are different sizes, and beds had to be put under eaves and around corners from each other and that sort of stuff to fit. So it has its own charm, that's for sure.
The chandelier was a replacement for some lanterns that had been in the hotel earlier. Looks beautiful, but a nuisance to clean. When I was here, there was no way to lower the chandelier readily. So what we did is we had some poor guy, usually one of the smallest, who was suspended on a chair from a rope from the ceiling. A number of us would pull him up. And then we have to hold him there Well, he cleaned and dusted the chandelier. This was usually a once-a-year project in the spring. It was precarious, to say the least, and it's a wonder someone never fell.
Lewis Hill's vision was to bring his guests north across the border in luxury cars called jammers. One could travel to the Prince of Wales in style.
I worked in Glacier Park 53 years ago as a dishwasher, and the gear jammers had the best jobs. So 53 years later, I find I get to be a gear jammer, and it's every bit as good as I thought it would be. To ride in a historic vehicle like this is just quite a great opportunity. It's a thrill.
I think it gives people a chance to go back and experience a little bit of history, a little bit what it was like for people in the 20s when they vacationed. It's a step back in time, and we love it. We think it's beautiful.
The hotel is very much a living building in a curious sort of way in that it flexes with the wind. This shaking is really unnerving to visitors. It will create a whistle in the hotel as it goes around those windows and doors. Not the best thing to help a tourist or a visitor sleep through the night. So often when I was here, they would come down at night into the lobby, and you'd offer them a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, some hot milk, anything just to kind of calm them, soothe them. That would usually work until the moment they heard a creak. And what they would hear is the chandelier moving. They would look up to the creek, and they'd see that chandelier just jiggling a little bit at a time, back and forth.
Guests have every right to be worried. The engineering required to withstand the wind is considerable. Huge beams and metal plates hold the chandelier and the roof in place.
What people did was they came down to the lobbies and they came down to the common rooms. And that's really where the enjoyment was, meeting other people in common rooms and sitting around having tea. And that's really what you get here.
I think Lewis Hill, when he built these hotels way back when, realized that the entertainment is in the lobby. The entertainment is partly just being in the hotel. That was something the traveling public liked, because all the hotels he built are built that way. They all have a beautiful big lobby, common area kind of place. Places for people to gather. We could certainly put a TV in every room, but that's something that we won't do as long as we're around.
I've never seen scenery more beautiful than this anywhere in the world, and we've been pleased to travel quite a bit. But it's just a unique setting. It's beautiful. I don't know of a finer place in the world. So.
The Prince of Wales Hotel is the beginning of what locals call the Trail of the Great Bear, a system of roads that lead north to Banff and Jasper National Parks. In the history of the Great Lodges, these roads represented a new freedom. Travelers could now explore the mountains at their own pace. But like the railway before them, the new highways followed trails traveled by the native peoples who had first explored what they called the Shining Mountains, the backbone of the world. Those mountains had proved a nightmare for the builders of the Canadian Pacific Railway. By the 1880s, they were seeking a way through the mountains to the Pacific. But looming ahead was the Continental Divide.
The railway came through a very difficult area, and but from a scenic point of view, a very spectacular area.
They hired local outfitters to find a way through the mountains. The outfitters, in turn, hired Indian guides.
I think it's really important to recognize the extent of native knowledge that was shared with early surveyors, guides, and later with trailmen and backcountry horse guides.
On a summer's day in 1882, one of those outfitters, Tom Wilson, was taken by Edwin Hunter, a Stoney guide, to the shores of what his people called the Lake of Little Fishes.
The surface of the lake was still as a mirror. Forest that had never known the axe came down to the shores. The background was divided into 3 tones: white, opal, and brown, where the glacier ceased and merged with the shining water.
It was near this Lake of Little Fishes, now Lake Louise, that Canadian Pacific was to find a route through the Rockies via the treacherous Kicking Horse Pass. In 1890, the railway built its first small chalet. Travelers could overnight on the shores of the jewel-like lake. The modest log building was destined to one day become one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world, Chateau Lake Louise.
To give you an idea of how the numbers worked, our first summer we had 50 guests who stayed here in Lake Louise, and by 1912, 50,000 guests. Today, on a typical summer day, 20,000 people will come to Upper Lake Louise.
Lake Louise is probably the best known of the Grand Train hotels that were connected with putting the railway across Canada. This seems to be the one that people know the best. Seems to be the one that people, I don't know whether it's been photographed more or it's because of the lake connected and the glacier connected with it, but it seems that way.
I would bet it is right up there with some of the, the 7 wonders of the world as being one of the most photographed places. It's such a perfect backdrop. It's like nature took everything it had to offer and plunked it all down in one little spot. You don't have to go very far, and you've seen it all.
Initially, Lake Louise was thought to be but a side trip for the wealthy clientele that came to stay at the Banff Springs Hotel. But as word of Lake Louise spread, the chalet expanded to meet the increasing demands.
The Chateau Lake Louise started as a small log cabin on the shore of one of the world's most famous beauty spots and sort of grew from that seed. The chateau started small and grew big as tourism expanded, as transportation and access expanded, and as the people, the numbers of people and the types of people coming there expanded.
The average stay was about 3 weeks. It's now less than 3 days. But then people traveled with steamer trunks, elegant clothes, everything they needed for a long trip. And of course, they tended to explore the areas in which they were visiting. And because of the nature of the hotels, which offered every amenity, it was possible to have extraordinary exploration and excitement during the day and come back and live very elegantly at night.
Arriving at Chateau Lake Louise has always been special. An oasis in the wilderness, the hotel was designed to stand apart. In 1912, the Painter Wing was built. A fashionable neo-Italian design, it was a radical departure from the traditional style of the chateau. But the unlikely couple was not to last. In 1924, the original wood structure was destroyed by fire. Canadian Pacific immediately began reconstruction, extending the Painter Wing. Once completed, the new Chateau Lake Louise would be the jewel in the crown of Canadian Pacific hotels. The interior of the hotel would have a European feel. The decor emphasizing a Swiss alpine motif.
People that choose to stay here because of the history of the place. So because of that, I think people expect to be taken back into another era. I wanted to capture that grand era of travel of the 20s.
Carrie Busby, an interior designer with a love of that era, was hired by Canadian Pacific 15 years ago to return the company's mountain hotels to their original splendor.
I really try to play up on that in my choices of furniture styles, as well as textiles and art, and to give a real sense of grandeur. The lake is often frozen to the middle of June, and so the light is very white and pristine here, and to create warmth, we chose to use a very warm palette. But all the colors I take from what you might see if you're trekking around the lake or in the summer or hiking or whatever. The colors are russets and sandstone colors that you see in the rock face. The reds are colors that you see in the berries in the fall.
The chateau wasn't open winters until quite recently. My husband has a wonderful story, actually, of watching the lake freeze over. He was sitting there, and there was all the steam rising off the lake, and then it just stopped, and it just instantaneously froze. But it was just one of those moments.
Skating up here is fabulous. I've been out here for 45 minutes by myself. I think it's the only place I could come skating by myself because the air is so fresh and the mountains are so beautiful. The kids out here are all so happy.
And it will be like a little jewel in the middle of the Rockies. We assemble like Legos and for the enjoyment of our customers. You can build castles.
Every winter, head chef Dominic Goyer shapes 30 tons of ice blocks into his own fantasy chateau.
It's completely different in Southern California. We're probably still wearing shorts back there right now. We come with a bunch of different families, all with the same age children, and they love to come out here and play hockey and ice skate, even though we don't ice skate a lot in Southern California. We ask them if they'd rather have Christmas at home or would they rather go to Canada, go skiing, and they always choose skiing. So we come.
It hasn't changed much at all, except for the highway. I mean, as soon as you get off the highway, it's just like it was. People today are still awestruck by the same view. Nothing's really changed. It's just as beautiful as it's always been.
Further north, where rivers run to the Arctic Ocean, is Jasper Park Lodge. Built by Canada's second transcontinental railway, Canadian National, and its president, Sir Henry Thornton. When Thornton saw the broad valley of the Athabasca River, he was inspired by a British landscape architect, Thomas Adams, to create a revolutionary new resort concept based on the idea of a medieval English village.
Thomas Adams is one of the originators of the whole town planning idea and developed this idea of a garden city. He wanted to maximize the natural features by getting away from this grid layout and having winding streets and using the contours of the land instead of bulldoze everything flat, lay down a grid. and put some buildings along the way. And you can see it very strongly here at the Jasper Park Lodge.
Thornton's gamble was to locate a lodge so far north of the American border. Would a Southern clientele patronize a remote Jasper Park Lodge?
He wanted to be distinct from the big chateau-style hotel that had been developed by the CPR, the rival. The idea of having a luxury kind of bungalow camp or cottage colony has its origins in the Adirondacks in the eastern United States. Wealthy industrialists would build these private camps with kind of clusters of cottages around the main lodge and ran them along the lines of country clubs with this kind of luxury service. What sets Jasper Park Lodge apart from any other of the bungalow camps in the Rockies? One is the sheer scale of it. It's huge. Right from the beginning, it was set up as a luxury resort with swimming pools, tennis courts, golf courses, gourmet dining, the whole thing.
I like the Digby scallops to start.
It's different than any other property because of the layout and how spread out we are. Anywhere you go, there's, something to do, and it's just literally a step and a breath right outside your door. You don't step out of your doorway into a hallway. I mean, you step out and you have instantly this breathtaking view of a mountain or, shimmering Lac Beauvert.
No matter how busy the lodge is, you're still only 10 or 12 meters away from the park. And you can see wolves and you can see elk and deer from your cabin. It doesn't feel crowded. You are amidst the park, but in an almost idyllic sense of what nature should have been like in the British sense of paradise, where you have this luxury and wildlife all around you and you are living in the midst of Eden.
Before Canadian National Railway built the lodge, along the shores of the greenest lake in the Rockies, Lac Beauvert, a small tent city was established on a site chosen by Jasper cowboys Fred and Jack Brewster. Tent City was a home for men working on the railway and local tourists.
He was an early guide and outfitter, and he felt that this had great potential to house his guests, so he created a kind of a tent city here. With the railway's arrival, they made a deal with Fred that they would purchase it and make it a hotel for their guests that were arriving by train.
Construction of the octagonal main lodge was completed in 1923. The building was to be the largest single-story log structure in the world. That first year, over 15,000 guests paid from $7 to $40 to stay. Every night, an orchestra played in a ballroom lit by old English wrought iron lanterns, soon to become the official symbol of the lodge.
The original lodge started out as a big rotunda. Because it is octagonal, it could use the logs out to make a bigger space and then have wings running from that. The other thing is it provided for a less formal, more rustic, natural setting.
But one horrible night in 1952, the main lodge burnt to the ground.
When they were presented with an opportunity to rebuild the lodge, they translated it into a modern idiom, the use of natural materials such as stone and timber, by using the post and beam and the cut stone and the concrete.
Throughout the lodge, a traditional native design was maintained.
They sort of took the flavor of the American architect Frank Lloyd Wright and subsequently, created and built this beautiful building that lays very low within the landscape and blends in with the surrounding environment.
After Sir Henry Thornton completed the original lodge in 1923, he turned his attention to the construction of a golf course like no other in the world at that time. He approached architect Stanley Thompson to create what he called a heroic design, since compared to Augusta National and Pebble Beach.
The holes feel like they just always been here. Working as a caddy in Jasper, you were playing the most beautiful golf course in the world. We'd work all day, and then these horrible rainstorms would come in, and we'd play 36 holes of golf in the rain just to play the golf course. I mean, being a caddy, that's the only time you can play. Summer went by, you never knew what day of the week it was. You just sort of lived on this golf course.
Thompson walked the rugged terrain behind the lodge. One by one, he found the holes, each totally natural in its feel, that would shape the ultimate mountain golf course.
I think he knew he had a special piece of property, and he took advantage of it without question. He used the attitude of he wanted, when you stood on the tee box, to be able to see the golf hole, and then in the distance, be able to see a mountain peak that would square up right in the center of a fairway or behind a green site, and he wanted that to be the focal point.
Each autumn ended with the Totem Pole Tournament, which attracted golfers from across the continent, including Bing Crosby, who won in 1947 while filming in Jasper. Crosby was not alone. Marilyn Monroe and Robert Mitchum, shooting River of No Return, booked the lodge's most opulent cabin for cast parties.
Outlook Cabin was originally built in 1932, and when it was done as a luxurious cabin with 5 guest rooms and maids' quarters, and was done for guests would come and stay for a season. The cabin burnt to the ground in November 2000, and the decision was made to do a reconstruction of it because there were so many guests that return every year and had so many memories of the place. We studied the early photographs and records we had of what was in the cabin and went from there. So many guests that have come back have noted that you don't even feel like the cabin has been changed or burnt down or restored because it's so exact to the original architecture. I tried to use furniture and materials that were in the original cabin. This is precisely how it looked before, with the batten cedar ceilings and the grand log beams and trusses, the 2-sided fireplace. On the mantel of the fireplace is a photograph of George VI and Queen Elizabeth that was taken when they were guests here on their tour across Canada in 1939.
You can sit out here in your luxury accommodation and see the deer or the elk, which is something you don't get if you're sitting in the Banff Springs Hotel, where you're surrounded by the trappings of a great big kind of urban type structure. The real attraction was not the monument that they were going to build here, but was the surrounding mountains, then the vegetation, the trees, and the animals.
We have so many guests who comment they actually think that the elk are, tame, that, we provide them and, they actually go into a barn at night.
I think the people and the animals, they get along pretty well. Yeah, there's times when we have to reroute and, it's a calf just got born on the 15th green, and that's what people love. That's why they're here. I think that's what gives this place even more character. It's all part of what makes the Jasper Park Lodge so memorable in people's mind.
The idea of living close to nature is not a new one. The Great Lodges of the Canadian Rockies carry traditions forward that began with the first native people to scale the Continental Divide. One of the most remote regions they explored was the Yoho Valley.
In the Cree Indian dialect, Yoho is wonder. The Yoho Valley was one of those sort of mysterious valleys. There, were reports of the great waterfalls. And the Yoho is on the west side of the divide. Heavier precipitation belt, a heavy snowpack area.
You have a feeling of being in the cathedral-type fir trees and old-growth forest, and very rugged country, higher peaks.
The natural barrier of the divide and the deep snows of the Canadian winter blocked the way of explorers, fur traders, and railway builders alike. Canadian Pacific, building the railway which was to connect Canada from sea to sea, met its greatest obstacle here at Yoho: how to climb the precipitous grades of Kicking Horse Pass. The solution was an intricate system of spiral tunnels, one of the engineering wonders of the world. At the foot of the tunnels is Field, British Columbia, a sleepy mountain hamlet from which the exploration of the backcountry would begin.
The CPR established its tourism business early on. There was Mount Stephen House in Field.
It was sort of a bouncing off place too for mountaineering and hiking now more, but people going to the Yoho Glacier, and of course all the waterfalls up there is quite beautiful.
Many climbers, hikers would go up into the upper Yoho to Takaka Falls and then head up further into the hanging valleys, and it was a challenge to get up there. It was quite a tight canyon. To crawl through the bush and follow a trail by horseback in those days would have been quite an adventure. And of course you're surrounded by great peaks, and many of those peaks were climbed in the early 1900s by the first guides and tourists, CPR tourists in the area.
At the head of the trail lie the 260-foot-high Twin Falls. And at their base, a fairy tale chalet deep in the forest, run by 42-year veteran of the high country, Fran Drummond.
Twin Falls is the smallest of the backcountry chalets. It's still considered to be quite a backcountry place. You can't drive to it, obviously. Hike, it takes a fair commitment in terms of physical stamina and being able to pack in there. And then so it's used as a base for further backcountry adventures and hikes. You can take a day hike from there and come back and have a wonderful meal cooked by Fran Drummond.
You won't find wood stoves like this in all the lodges. I think I'm about the only one that uses them now. It's slow, but the flavors all come together slowly. Yeah. The backcountry appealed to me, and this valley was rather special. The mountains have a special quality wherever they are. It takes a sixth sense to be a mountain person, in that you have to be a real person to be in the mountains. You have to be a sophisticated person to be in the mountains. You have to be a creative person to be in the mountains.
Oh, Fran!
Hi, Brian.
Fran's part of the attraction.
Haven't seen you for a while.
This backcountry legend who can still, at her age, pack her own stuff in and hike that trail down that valley.
She'd have me packing stuff on a horse, and I'd helped her on with her backpack, and I could hardly lift it, you know. I'm sure it must have weighed 70 pounds, and she's not a very big lady, as you know. She's tough as nails, there's no two ways about that. I don't know, I like to think her as the queen of the valley there, I think.
That's a bugger.
Well, she's a character. She's one of a kind. The end of a breed, I think, of people that have really gone back through a lot of changes in the Rockies, and she harkens back to another era when things were a lot different. It's nice to see someone maintaining that tradition.
She's the chief cook and bottle washer, unless she can get you to bottle wash.
The people who have worked here grow up and bring their families. They want to show their kids where they've worked. In fact, they try and sign them on at the time. You here, you take them for the summer. Now we're getting started here.
We walk down into the kitchen, and you spend a lot of time in the kitchen when you're here with Fran, because she likes her guests to come in and talk to her. You walk down those stairs that are just worn slippery from people walking on them.
The rooms are not soundproofed at all. So if you're sleeping in one of those rooms, you can hear the person in the next room roll over. And so there was the honeymoon couple who really had a great time, and but when they finished, there was applause through the whole building, you know.
Those buildings haven't really changed. There's the wear and the footprints of everybody who has ever stayed there since the beginning. You feel that as soon as you come into a place like this. And the smell of wood smoke creates the atmosphere, too.
It all began with a tent camp built by the first surveyors to reach the falls in 1908.
They'd bring their teepees and put them around the one building. And I'm sure that building just housed flour, sugar, milk of some kind, and they brought the rest with them on horseback.
By the time John Murray Gibbon, the marketing director of the CPR, came to inspect the new lodge, he found a backcountry Shangri-La, combining travel in the wild with comfort and elegance.
This part was built, that part was there, and this interconnection was done at a latter date.
The design that the CPR was coming up with was more of a Swiss chalet style of design. They didn't want the small little matchstick Rocky Mountain log cabin. And so the CPR designed these cabins made out of pretty monstrous logs for the size of the building.
These are spruce, and right from the area, they skid them in with horses, and then they made these cuts here so that they would fit together, and then they lifted them into place with block and tackle, and it took 3 years. I don't think the building's going to fall down tomorrow. This is the most important building on the farm. We used to have a porcupine that would sit down the hole of the outhouse, and we'd warn all people, please look before you sit down, lest you have a shock.
Like many backcountry lodges, the history of Twin Falls is closely tied to the Swiss guides Canadian Pacific hired to ensure the safety of guests.
Right after they built Twin Falls, one of the channels got blocked above the falls. The CPR sent the Swiss guides up above the falls with dynamite and blew that channel out again so that Twin Falls would be recreated.
When anybody wanted to go climbing or wanted to know how to climb, you always sought out the Swiss guides. They guided, but they did the surveys of all the trails.
The Skyline Trail that skirts the very edge of the precipice, the most extreme challenge.
You have to be careful. It can be very dangerous. You don't do anything too fast. You don't do anything when you're too tired, because that's when you're likely to have that accident that could be fatal.
Things are much the same here as they would have been 80 or 90 years ago. No electricity, no running water. It gives you a taste of times gone by when hiking and camping were a little different than they are now.
And it's nice not to have a clock telling you what time you have to be somewhere, or just wing it and do whatever you feel like, and it feels pretty good. It's only been a couple of days, but it seems like a lot longer than that.
There's very few places like this left in the Rockies, and it's a privilege to be able to stay at a place like this. I find it almost a mystical, spiritual experience, stepping outside your normal busy lifestyle to come and sit and contemplate some of these wonders. It's very sobering. It's very sustaining, I find.
This is authentic as you're going to find, of how your grandmother lived.
Sweet peas.
And that has to be preserved. I would hope that it would be maintained. I'm going beyond me. I mean, I'm going to be here till I'm 100, but you know, after that, who knows? I'd love to give heritage cooking lessons here on a wood stove.
Thank you, our Lord, for this beautiful place that we are.
There's still people around that say, oh, I was brought up on a farm with an outhouse, or my mother cooked on a wood stove. And it's going to become a lost art unless we preserve that.
Along the Continental Divide lie the immense Columbia ice fields, the remains of the mile-thick layer of ice that once covered the greater part of North America. Native people believed spirits lived here, at the top of the world.
In the late 1800s, there was a number of members of the Appalachian Mountain Club that would come out from the eastern United States. And one of these people was Samuel Allen, who was a keen climber. And he used a native guide by the name of Yule Carrier. Through Yule and their knowledge of the Stoney Indian dialect, they came up with names that they thought were appropriate for a lot of the key lakes or peaks. And so some of those here at Lake O'Hara are Lake Owesa, which is a native name for ice-covered. Weewaxie Peaks, which are just up here to our right, is a place of wind, or a windy place. And probably one of the most significant in names was Hungabi. Hungabi stood for the savage chieftain. It indeed looks like a savage chief.
In 1887, surveyors for the Canadian Pacific Railway were the first Europeans to discover Lake O'Hara. Early hikers and campers coming into the area were captivated by the scenery. They set up rest camps along the lake's shore. Lake O'Hara Lodge was built near the rail line on the British Columbia side of the Great Divide.
I think Lake O'Hara is nature's consummate design project. Everything is here. You've got glaciers, you've got perfect lakes in every hue of green and blue. You've got pine forests. You've got waterfalls and gorges and steep rock faces and flat open meadows. You have everything, and you have it in close proximity to a well-appointed lodge.
The first time I came up here, it was a beautiful, as we call them, O'Hara Day. Blue sky, lots of snow on the peaks, and I was just blown away. I mean, I still am. The lodge was built in 1926 by the CPR. What's really neat is we have some generations of families who remember those times of coming up by horseback. It's neat.
We're on the 5th generation of some families coming back, and it's one of those places that I think you get bitten by O'Hara and you just can't not come back. The hiking is still very key, you know, today with the snow falling. The guests are still all out hiking, you know. It's not like they're all going to hang around because it's snowy. You're still out there doing it.
It's definitely a winter wonderland today for the middle of September. Yes. At times we even get a snowfall like this in August. That really shocks the summer crowd.
The delight is now you get to come back. Somebody else is cooking for you.
Food is really important. It's even more important on the rainy days. Lots of hot soups. And it's also a time of the day when people share their day. People sit together. You're going to meet people that you've never met before. You'll sit with them, share a good meal, and meet some new friends. It's just a really neat atmosphere that happens around dinner time here.
The fireplace gives people a feeling of warmth, and it really becomes a focal point. It's the focal point for the lodge. We've got it full of full-size logs. At one time, that would have been the heat source for the place. And in the winter, it does provide a source of heat. There's a lot of huddling around that fireplace in the wintertime.
Every window you look out of is beautiful. I have a nice cup of tea. I think the people who run the establishment are wonderful people. And then the people who come in here to stay here also, you know, very friendly and very social.
At day's end, the cabins extend a simple welcome. Little in their interiors has changed since the 1920s, when artists like J.E.H. MacDonald began to discover O'Hara. MacDonald stayed here in cabin number 2 79 years ago.
And he gives you all those wonderful rustic hints. He gives you the Hudson's Bay Company blankets on the bed, little glass jars filled with flowers that have been gathered in the meadow. In fact, in one of his scenes, there's actually one of his paintings on the wall in the painting, which I think is quite wonderful. So he's set up there. The painting's drying. And I think they were sort of memories that he created so he could take a little bit of Lake O'Hara, the ambiance of this great place, when he went home.
In the valley below Lake O'Hara, Christmas comes to Chateau Lake Louise. Another season in the great lodges of the Canadian Rockies draws to an end. The snows have come to the backcountry, and the most remote lodges have shut for the winter.
Most of these historic lodges have been here, some of them before they were parks, and have kept, they're part of the landscape now. They're an important part of the history of the park. And the linkage, I think, between the natural environment and people staying are really strong.
Makes it look sticky, eh?
Families gather at Lake Louise to celebrate the traditions of mountain Christmases past.
Any country should try and preserve not everything, but a certain element so that the younger generation will appreciate where their forefathers came from. Canada is so young and sometimes so naive, and their history is going to go right down the drain if they don't start preserving it.
In the Valser Stube room at the chateau, the men and women who share the history of the lodges have an old-fashioned Swiss fondue.
There are secret places. Actually, there are probably places here that not 2 people a year go to. Maybe nobody.
The great lodges of the Canadian Rockies never cease to cast their spell.
The park grabs you and holds you and never lets you go. You always keep coming back. For me, it's been year after year, 30 years, and I'm still coming back.
National funding for Great Lodges of the Canadian Rockies was made possible by Alberta Travel. Call us at 1-800-ALBERTA. And contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.